It started so subtly, like the first hairline crack in a perfectly painted wall. Not a big, gaping fissure, just a whisper of something off. A tiny flaw you could almost convince yourself wasn't there if you didn't look too closely. My life with Mark, it wasn't just good, it was the life. The one you see in those Pottery Barn catalogs, all warm lighting and cozy throws, golden retrievers lounging by a stone fireplace. We had the house in the suburbs, the one with the big backyard and the swing set we bought even before we had kids, just because we envisioned them there someday. We had the dual income, the sensible cars, the annual beach vacation down in North Carolina. 10 years married, a decade of building this fortress of comfort and predictability, brick by brick. Mark is a good man, salt of the earth, stable. He's an engineer, you know. Everything in his world has a logical solution, a blueprint. He provided, he protected, he was loyal to a fault. When he said forever, you felt it in your bones, felt the solid weight of that promise. And I loved him. I really did. It wasn't the fiery, knock you off your feet kind of love anymore, the way it was when we were 23 and living in that tiny apartment downtown, but it was deep, a quiet, enduring current, a comfortable warmth. It was the love of two people who knew each other's rhythms, could finish each other's sentences, anticipated each other's needs without a word. Or so I thought. Looking back, the silence was the problem. Not literal silence. Our house was often full of the clatter of everyday life, the TV humming, the faint whir of the dishwasher, but an emotional silence. We stopped talking about the big things, the real things, somewhere along the way. We'd talk about work, about what to make for dinner, about the leaking faucet in the guest bathroom, about whether we should finally get a new patio set. But the conversations that peel back layers, that explore the depths of who you are and what you're feeling, those dwindled. They became rare, then non-existent. And I, being me, being the kind of person who hates confrontation and thrives on keeping the peace, I let it happen. I folded into the quiet, mistaking it for contentment. I convinced myself this was what settled adult love felt like. It was safe, it was easy, but it was also still. Then Ryan walked into my office. It was a Tuesday. He was a new consultant brought in to streamline our department's workflow. My boss introduced us in the main bullpen, and even through the din of keyboards and muffled phone calls, I felt it. Not a jolt, not a lightning strike, just a subtle shift in the air, like when the pressure drops right before a summer storm. He had this easy smile, not flashy, but genuine, and eyes that held a quick, intelligent spark. He was a few years younger than me, probably early 30s, with a lean build and a habit of running a hand through his slightly disheveled dark hair when he was thinking. We shook hands, and his grip was firm, warm. A simple handshake, nothing more, but it lingered in my mind for longer than it should have. Our initial interactions were strictly professional: meetings, strategy sessions, brainstorming over lukewarm coffee in the conference room. But even then, there was something different about talking to him. He listened, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but absorbing, processing, asking follow-up questions that made me feel seen, heard. It was a novel sensation. Mark listened, sure, but his listening often came with a practical analysis, a problem-solving approach. Ryan's listening felt more empathetic, more curious about the why behind what I was saying, not just the what. He'd remember little details I mentioned offhand, like my love for spicy Thai food or a throwaway comment about a difficult project from years ago. He'd bring it up days later, not in a creepy way, but in a way that showed he'd actually filed it away. It started innocently enough, staying a little late to finish up a project together, grabbing a quick bite from the deli downstairs when everyone else had gone home. We talked about work, then about the city, about our lives. He was from out of state, new to the area, living in a cool loft apartment downtown. He talked about his passion for photography, his travels, his eclectic taste in music. He was vibrant, adventurous, completely unlike anyone in my usual circle, especially Mark. Mark's adventures were usually limited to finding a new hiking trail or trying a different brand of craft beer. Ryan's adventures involved backpacking through South America, diving with sharks, documenting street art. He breathed a different kind of air. The guilt, it started almost immediately, a dull throb beneath my ribs. I'd go home to Mark, to our quiet, comfortable house, and I'd feel like I was wearing a mask. The conversations about leaky faucets and dinner plans felt hollower than ever. I'd hug him, kiss him goodnight, and a strange coldness would settle in my stomach. It wasn't that I loved Mark less, not consciously, but something new was stirring, something dangerous and exhilarating. It was the feeling of being awake again after a long, gentle slumber. One evening, after a particularly intense and successful presentation we'd co-led, Ryan suggested we celebrate. A real dinner, he said, leaning against the doorframe of my cubicle, that easy smile playing on his lips. Not just a sad desk salad. My heart did a little flutter kick. It was after 7 p.m. Mark would be home, probably microwaving leftovers, expecting me to walk through the door any minute. I should really head out, I said, picking at a loose thread on my sweater, my eyes scanning the nearly empty office. Mark's probably wondering where I am. Ryan just nodded, didn't push. But then he said, "You know, Sarah, you light up when you talk about your ideas. It's infectious." And just like that, the resolve I thought I had dissolved. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word a small, rebellious whisper. "One drink to celebrate." One drink turned into two, then a delicious, spicy Thai dinner at a small place Ryan knew, tucked away on the side street. We talked for hours about dreams we'd shelved, regrets we carried, hopes we still secretly held. He told me about a past relationship that had ended badly, how it had left him wary but not cynical. I found myself opening up about things I hadn't articulated in years, not even to Mark. The quiet yearning for something more, the feeling of being a little lost in the comfort, the fading of my own ambitions that had been so bright in my 20s. He listened, his gaze steady and intense, making me feel like I was the only person in the universe. He made me feel intelligent, interesting, alive. When he dropped me off at my car, the city lights blurring behind him, it was well past midnight. I drove home in a daze, the silence of my car amplifying the pounding in my chest. Mark was asleep, his side of the bed undisturbed. I slipped in beside him, the scent of his familiar aftershave a sudden, stark reminder of my transgression. My skin felt hot, my mind buzzing. I felt a wave of profound guilt, so heavy it threatened to drown me. But beneath it, a tiny, defiant spark of exhilaration. I hadn't cheated, not technically. It was just dinner, just talking. But it felt like a betrayal nonetheless, a secret held tightly in the hollow of my chest. The just dinners became more frequent. Working late became a common excuse. Mark, bless his trusting heart, rarely questioned it. He'd just say, "Don't work too hard, honey," and kiss me on the forehead. Each kiss felt like a brand, each lie a fresh wound I inflicted on him and on myself. I started dressing a little differently for work, spending more time on my hair, choosing perfumes I hadn't worn in years. I told myself it was for me, for my confidence, but deep down I knew who I was trying to impress. The line blurred, then vanished. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly grueling meeting, Ryan and I were the last ones in the office. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile glow. He was packing up his laptop and I was gathering my things, my mind still reeling from a disagreement with a difficult client. I sighed, feeling the weight of it all. He looked up, sensing my mood. "Rough one, huh?" he asked, his voice soft. I just nodded, feeling a sudden, inexplicable rush of tears welling in my eyes. It wasn't about the client. It was about everything. The lies, the tension, the quiet erosion of my marriage, the intoxicating pull towards him. He walked over to me, stood in front of my desk. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with those knowing eyes. Then he reached out, gently, and sucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed my cheek, and a shiver ran through me. It was so simple, so tender, and yet it felt like the most intimate gesture in the world. My breath hitched. He leaned in, slowly, his gaze locked on mine, asking for permission without a single word, and I gave it. My eyes drifted shut as his lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate kiss, not at first. It was soft, hesitant, exploratory, but it deepened quickly, a slow burn that ignited everything I had suppressed for so long. All the unspoken desires, the loneliness, the yearning for connection, it all poured into that kiss. My hands found their way to his hair, pulling him closer. His arms wrapped around my waist, holding me tight. The world outside the office, the hum of the lights, the empty cubicles, It all faded away. There was just us, in that sterile, fluorescent lit space, burning with a clandestine fire. When we finally broke apart, breathless, my head was spinning. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Guilt hit me then, a tidal wave of it, colder and more crushing than anything I'd felt before. I had crossed the line, irrevocably. "Oh my God," I whispered, pulling away, my hands flying to cover my mouth. "I can't believe I just did that." Ryan just looked at me, his eyes full of a complicated mix of longing and understanding. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and husky, "I know, but I don't regret it." And neither did I, not entirely. That was the truly terrifying part. A part of me, the part that had been suffocating under the weight of expectation and routine, felt reborn. The shame was immense, a hot, prickling sensation all over my skin, but it was coupled with a rush of something potent, something I hadn't felt in years. Desire. Raw, undeniable desire. That night, I barely slept. I lay next to Mark, rigid, staring at the ceiling, replaying the kiss, feeling Ryan's touch, the taste of him still on my lips. The silence in the house felt like a judgment. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, a stranger in my own bed. I felt dirty, yet alive. It was a horrifying paradox. The affair began in earnest after that. It was clandestine, thrilling, and utterly devastating to my soul. We met in quiet coffee shops on the other side of town, stole moments in empty conference rooms, sometimes just parked somewhere remote, talking for hours until the windows fogged up. He never pushed, never made me feel cheap or used. He made me feel treasured, desired, understood. We'd talk about everything and nothing, about the profound and the mundane. He'd tell me about his dreams of opening a small art gallery someday. I'd confess my secret longing to go back to school for interior design, a dream I'd shelved years ago when Mark and I decided to focus on saving for our future, our family. The lies became more intricate, more practiced. Girls' night out, working late on a big project, errands after work. My calendar was a tapestry of deceit. My phone was a weapon, carefully guarded. Texts deleted instantly, calls screened. The stress was immense. I lost weight, slept poorly, and my temper frayed easily. Mark noticed some of it, of course. "You seem stressed, honey," he'd say, his brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything okay at work?" I'd brush it off, forcing a smile, blaming deadlines or a difficult boss. He'd offer to rub my shoulders or make me my favorite tea. Each gesture of his kindness was another knife twist in my gut. One weekend, Ryan and I drove up to a small town a couple of hours away, a place known for its antique shops and charming B&Bs. We told our respective circles we were visiting friends. The drive was exhilarating, the windows down, music blasting. For those 2 days, I was just Sarah, not Mark's wife, not the responsible professional, just a woman experiencing something raw and real. We explored the town, laughed over bad coffee, wandered through antique stores holding hands like a young couple. That night, in a quaint B&B room with a flickering fireplace, our intimacy deepened. It was more than just physical. It was an emotional surrender. I cried into his shoulder afterward, hot tears of relief and sorrow. He held me tight, stroking my hair, murmuring reassurances. "It's okay, Sarah. We'll figure it out." But there was no figuring it out, only deeper entanglement. Coming home after those weekends was like crash landing. The cheerful normalcy of my house, the way Mark would greet me with a hug and a recounting of his weekend, it felt like a costume I had to quickly pull back on. I felt a constant gnawing self-loathing. I was disgusted with myself, with the person I had become. But the pull towards Ryan was too strong. It was like an addiction, a craving for the feeling of being truly seen, truly desired, that I couldn't seem to resist. The cracks in my marriage became impossible to ignore. Mark, who was usually so patient, started getting frustrated. We argued more, small arguments that quickly escalated because I was so emotionally volatile. He'd ask why I was so distant, why I wasn't present. "You're always on your phone," he'd say, or "you're staring off into space." I'd snap back, defensive, accusing him of being demanding, of not understanding my stress. The man who had been my rock for 10 years was suddenly a source of irritation, a barrier to the exhilarating, dangerous life I was living in secret. I hated myself for treating him that way, for turning his love into a weapon against him. The affair lasted for 6 months. 6 months of living a double life, 6 months of sustained, agonizing emotional acrobatics. The weight of it was crushing me. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the haunted, tired woman staring back. The thrill had been replaced by a pervasive anxiety. I was constantly afraid of being caught, of the fallout, of the pain I knew I was inflicting. The end, when it came, was not dramatic in the way you see in movies. There was no confrontation, no enraged spouse bursting in. It was quieter, more insidious. Ryan got an offer for a permanent position in a different city, a great opportunity. He told me one evening, over the phone, his voice tinged with regret. "I have to take it, Sarah. It's too good to pass up." My heart sank, a cold, leaden weight. A part of me was relieved, a lifeline thrown to my drowning conscience. Another part felt a profound sense of loss, like a limb was being amputated. "What about us?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, even though I knew the answer. He paused, a long, heavy silence. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle, "this was never sustainable. You know that. We both knew that." He was right. We had both been complicit in this beautiful, destructive illusion. "I care about you, Sarah, more than I can say." He used the past tense. "But you have a life here, a husband, and I can't be that other life for you." He was letting me go. Or rather, he was choosing himself, his future, which didn't include being the other man in a complicated affair. And I couldn't blame him. We said our goodbyes a few days later in a quiet park near our office, under the pretense of a farewell lunch with colleagues who never materialized. It was a warm, sunny day, birds chirping, children laughing in the distance. The stark contrast to my internal landscape was almost unbearable. He hugged me tightly, kissed my forehead, a final, tender gesture. "Be well, Sarah," he murmured. "Find your happiness." And then he walked away, out of my life, leaving me standing there, hollowed out, utterly alone with the wreckage I had created. That was it. He was gone. The affair was over. And I was left with Mark, with our comfortable house, with the quiet life that felt suddenly suffocating. The relief I expected to feel never came. Instead, it was replaced by an immense emptiness, a gnawing regret, and the cold, hard realization of what I had done. I had chased a fleeting excitement, a temporary validation, and in doing so, I had fractured everything good and solid in my life. I came home that night, and Mark was in the kitchen, making dinner. He looked up, smiled. "Hey, you're home early," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "Rough day?" I just stared at him, at his kind, unsuspecting face, and the dam broke. All the guilt, all the shame, all the pain of the past 6 months, it came crashing down. My chest tightened, my throat closed up. I dropped my bag and burst into tears, ugly, racking sobs that shook my entire body. Mark was at my side in an instant, his arms around me, his brow furrowed with confusion and concern. "Sarah, what is it? What's wrong?" He held me tight, trying to comfort me, not knowing that he was holding the very person who had betrayed him in the most fundamental way. I couldn't speak, couldn't articulate the enormity of my sin.
I just clung to him, weeping uncontrollably, the tears flowing not just for the loss of Ryan, but for the devastating realization of what I had done to Mark, to us, to myself. I tried to tell him that night. I sat him down on the couch, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. The words felt like stones in my mouth. "Mark," I started, "we need to talk." He looked at me, his eyes full of worry. I saw the love there, the trust, and it twisted the knife deeper. I started to form the confession, to push the words out, but they caught in my throat. How could I shatter his world? How could I look him in the eye and tell him I had willfully, repeatedly broken every promise we had ever made? I couldn't. Not that night. I chickened out. Instead, I spun a tale about being overwhelmed at work, about feeling lost and directionless, about being afraid I wasn't enough for him. He held me, comforted me, told me I was more than enough, told me we'd get through it together. And as he spoke those loving, reassuring words, I felt like the most despicable person on the planet. My deceit was now a festering wound, deep and infected, beneath the surface of our life. The days that followed were a living hell. Ryan was gone, out of my life, but the ghost of him lingered, a constant reminder of my betrayal. Every time Mark touched me, every time he smiled at me, every time he said, "I love you," The guilt clawed at my insides. I couldn't look him in the eye for too long. Our bed, which had once been a sanctuary, felt like a prison. My own body felt alien to me, stained by my choices. I started going to therapy, secretly, telling Mark it was for my stress and anxiety. And it was, in a way. The therapist was kind, patient. I poured out my story, the whole ugly truth, to a stranger in a beige office, the only person I felt I could be honest with. She didn't judge. She just listened, asked probing questions, helped me unravel the tangled mess of my emotions. She helped me see that my actions weren't just about Ryan or about Mark, but about a deeper dissatisfaction within myself, a search for something I felt was missing, a void I tried to fill with external validation. The decision to tell Mark eventually became inevitable. I couldn't live with the lie anymore. It was poisoning me, poisoning our home. It was like living in a house with a toxic gas leak, pretending everything was fine, while slowly dying inside. The thought of hurting him was agony, but the thought of continuing to deceive him was worse. He deserved the truth, no matter how brutal. One Saturday morning, several weeks after Ryan had left, Mark was making pancakes, humming along to the radio. The smell of maple syrup filled the kitchen, a smell that had always signified comfort and happiness. I watched him, his back to me, his broad shoulders, the way his hair fell slightly over his collar. This man, my husband, who had always been so good to me.
My heart ached with a pain so profound it felt physical. "Mark," I said, my voice shaking. He turned, a spatula in his hand, a questioning look on his face. "What's up, honey? Pancakes are almost ready." "I need to tell you something," I choked out, the words finally, painfully, forcing their way past my lips. My throat was tight, my eyes blurring with tears before I even started. He saw the raw pain on my face, the absolute devastation, and his smile faltered. He put the spatula down, slowly, his gaze sharpening. He knew, I think, even before I said anything. That intuitive connection we had always shared, it told him something fundamental was about to break. I cheated on you, Mark." The words were out. A gasp, a ragged, awful sound tore from my throat. With Ryan, from work, his face drained of all color. The humming stopped. The cheerful kitchen became utterly silent, except for the frantic pounding of my own heart in my ears. He just stared at me, his eyes wide, disbelieving. Then slowly, heartbreakingly, filling with a confusion that morphed into pure, raw pain. The man who had a logical solution for everything suddenly had no solution, no blueprint for this. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He just stood there, still as a statue, and I watched his world shatter in his eyes. The light went out of them. A slow tear tracked down his cheek. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice broken, a sound I will never, ever forget. "How could you?" That was the beginning of the end. Or maybe the end of the beginning. The next few weeks were a blur of agonizing conversations, accusations, apologies that felt inadequate, explanations that sounded hollow even to my own ears. He wanted to know everything, the details, the whys. I tried to answer honestly, explaining my loneliness, my feeling of being lost, the intoxicating attention. But even as I spoke, I knew it sounded like pathetic excuses for an unforgivable act. Nothing I said could undo the harm. Nothing could heal the wound. He moved into the guest room. The silence in the house became deafening, an oppressive weight. We moved like ghosts around each other, polite strangers sharing a space. The smell of his aftershave, which once brought comfort, now brought only a fresh wave of grief. Our meals together were torture, a silent testament to the gaping chasm between us. His parents called, then mine. The whispers started. Friends who had been our friends suddenly picked sides or disappeared altogether. I became the one who cheated. My identity, which had been so intertwined with Mark's, with our life together, was suddenly fragmented, tainted. I bore the shame, the judgment, and the profound guilt. And I deserved it. The divorce wasn't protracted. There wasn't much fight in either of us. We were both too broken. We split everything down the middle, amicably, clinically, like two business partners dissolving a venture. The house, our sanctuary, felt like a museum of lost dreams. Walking through it, packing my things, each item, each photograph, was a searing reminder of the life I had so carelessly dismantled. The swing set in the backyard, glinting in the afternoon sun, became a symbol of the future we'd imagined, the one I had destroyed. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It was sterile, impersonal, filled with boxes and the echoing silence of solitude. The quiet was no longer comfortable, it was crushing. I would sit on the floor, surrounded by unpacked boxes, and just cry. For Mark, for the pain I caused him, for the loss of our life, for the woman I used to be, for the woman I had become. It's been over a year now. Mark is still in the house. I see him sometimes, at the grocery store or passing by in his car. He looks thinner, older, a sadness etched around his eyes that wasn't there before. He never looks at me. He just looks through me, as if I'm no longer corporeal, just a hazy outline of a person he once knew. And that, in its own way, is worse than any anger or shouting. It's the ultimate erasure. Ryan reached out once, months ago, a simple text asking how I was doing. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He was the catalyst, but the choice, the active, conscious choice to step over the line, that was mine, and mine alone. I own that. I'm still in therapy. It's a slow, arduous process of rebuilding, of figuring out who Sarah is, independent of a husband, independent of a secret affair. The loneliness is immense. The guilt is a constant companion, a heavy cloak I wear everywhere. There are days I feel like I can't breathe under its weight. I made a monumental mistake, a selfish, destructive choice, and I shattered a good man's trust, destroyed a beautiful life. And I have to live with that every single day. The quiet comfort is gone. The warmth has been replaced by a lingering chill. And sometimes, late at night, when the city outside is finally still, I can almost hear the soft, haunting echo of the life I walked away from, and the profound, agonizing silence of what's left.